it.
No, actually, I was going to ask if there's questions, because I think there's quite a lot that was said here about the process, and I've got one question maybe just to lead us off, and Ishmael, maybe to you. If we're looking at focus groups and involvement, for those who've never been involved with these type of process, what will it involve? You know, what would you demand of people, of their time and involvement? If you can maybe sketch that out a bit.
Thanks, Richard. Normally, our focus groups, first of all, we identify, that is why I use the term, a concept document. So what we do is we normally develop within the CIDB, whether we use external resources, what we develop a concept document. And that would identify the role players. So from that, the role players, then we approach the associations, like Radia said. They're the main culprits, for example, and the main source of expertise. But in this case, there are new expertise which we haven't worked with. For example, we have software developers, software providers. We have BIM specialists, managers, or people who do the design and drawings and whatever, which we are not familiar with. So this particular area, we want to solicit that expertise as well, added to our usual participants. Once we have done that, we would within, for example, once we have established the concept document, in this case, it will be very quick because we know what we want. The standard has been published. We will then, through you, because we don't have that sort of network, that's why we joined with you. So we will then work through you to establish who the experts are. You will then solicit the members and the network. You will then establish a focus group for this particular one, which is the annexure development. What we do is the CIDB, like this one here, we arrange a venue with whatever goes for that. And then we discussed, it normally takes about 4 hours in terms of discussing the concept document. We then garner inputs from the participants. And at that, the initial meeting, the inception, we normally get more invitations, more information about who the other people are, experts and things. And through then the CIDB, again, either internally or external, through external service provider, we enhance the document. And then it's an iterative process, probably about 3, 4. We consult, and that is part of the consultation process. And then that is how we will then sort of need the expertise of the experts here. Ultimately, it will be handed over to SABS for their processes. They've got their own protocol before it gets published. But the groundwork starts with this. Is how we envisage how we're going to do things here. Thank you.
I was just going to maybe just put a little bit of a different perspective on that. I haven't been, so I think, you know, over the past probably 15 years, I've been involved in countless sort of groups, and I really should get out a bit more. But ultimately, it's a thankless task, right? And the pay is awful.
Used to.
The pay is awful, but ultimately, for me, it's very rewarding. Okay, in terms of getting involved, being with like-minded people, feeling that you're sort of making a small contribution to moving things forward. So I would encourage, if you are sat there thinking about it, then even just if it's a few hours, it will all help.
Yes, maybe just also say, Rudolf Opperman, retired building control officer. Ishmael, 100% correct. We need your policy from CIDB through the minister to place pressure on the SABS to provide us a technical committee, which would then allow us to enter TC 59 so that we can establish an SE 13. SE 13, ladies and gentlemen, that's the working group that will come from your environment, that will then develop a South African annex. But the policy is needed to force government to move in the right direction. What you've done going through facilities, great stuff. You've done work already, but it's not worth anything in terms of the building industry at this stage. And because of that, we need to move it back into TC 59 so that it becomes legislation long term? Thank you, sir.
We did take a heavy look at just how to get it into TC 59, but it didn't work out. There was just not the skill there. So if that's a way of twisting somebody's arm and hiring some skills in that place, great.
But sorry, just to respond. It's not got to do with the skills in TC 59. It has got with the policy pressure that needs to get SABS to take up the challenge. SABS is only going to be the secretariat. The skills comes from this environment sitting around this venue.
Thank you. So I'm Maria Paschini from the South African Institute of Architects. So I don't know if this question is stupid or smart, but I'm like trying to understand, and I'm new to BIM, okay? Just how does all this information translate into BIM?
I'd say, yeah, it's difficult to say how it would translate, but for me, it's an enabler. So as I was saying before, I was looking around the room, maybe a few of you may have started off on a drawing board, okay? And so I went through that transition from the drawing board to swapping a pen for a mouse. And so it was a fundamental shift in the way the tools that were used to produce information. We're still producing information, but what we found is that all these new tools, basically they've just enabled us, and apologies to the vendors in the room, they've enabled us to produce poor quality information quicker than we could with the previous tool. All right, so for all the innovations on, and that's not a fault of the tool, that's because we're adopting new ways of producing information, but we haven't changed the way in which we manage it. And that is where ISO 19650 comes in. So for me, it's very much information management is an enabler to innovating new ways of working, new ways of producing information. If you want to label it as BIM, fine. But for me, it's just about individuals. So be so soft now, yeah. So if you want to call it BIM, that's fine. But it's about the collaborative production of information. I'd say BS 1192 was first published in 2007, coming up to almost 20 years. We still haven't quite got the hang of it. That's because we need to change the way in which we manage information. That's where I feel this sits.
Maybe a question to ask yourself is when you hear the word BIM, sure everybody can hear me.
Oh, sorry. Maybe the question you need to ask yourself is if when you hear the word BIM, what do you think of first? Is it Revit? Is it AutoCAD? And if it's that, then you have the wrong perception of what building information modeling is all about, because it's about workflows and processes. And the information standard that we're trying to push onto our clients and onto the industry is to assist us in the production of that information.
Yeah,
That was a very fair question, by the way.
there's a complete missing. Quite a few years ago, we were involved in briefing huge buildings, and that first part, that black section at the start there, the client had absolutely no idea of what size building they wanted, what it needed to look like, what needed to be inside it, and you have to evolve all of that stuff. So for me, looking at the black part, I'm saying I can't imagine that it can't come fast enough. Okay.
Any other questions? We're a tiny bit early for tea, so if there are one or two more questions, Rian.
Just want to ask, when it comes to classifications and standards that you said, the next year we can go our own way. There's probably groups that maintain that separate standards and classifications that needs to be involved. So would you suggest rather this international classification system or systems that's maintained already overseas? South Africa just aligns with that.
Yeah, I'm not going to. Difficulty is because I do get to go around some really nice places, is that to come across arrogant to say, what you need to do is just adopt the UK standards and everything's going to be fine. All right. So, and I would never do that. But you picked up on a good point in terms of the classification system. So the reason why we call it UniClass is the long name is Unified Classification System. The reason it came about, I'll try and keep this short. Basically, we had several classification systems. Each professional body had their own classification system because they were all very special and they could only have their own classification system. So we put a group together called CPIC, which is the Construction Project Information Committee. And so that was there was a representative from each of the major professional bodies on that committee. The group was put together to try and find a common ground where we could. So all the different classification systems were put on a table, and then we thought, okay, how could we unify them into a single one? And that's so UniClass 90. I think that was done in 97. It's been maintained originally by CPIC. Well, 2015 was so ISO 12006 Part 2 was published in 2015. So that's why we now call it UniClass 2015. And people say, when's the next one coming out? It's because we've aligned it with ISO 12006 Part 2 2015. Right. So that wasn't the year that we developed it. So, but basically, it was initially maintained by CPIC, which was a voluntary organization representative of each of the professional bodies. When in terms of government, the government then through what was called, I think at the time, Innovate UK, I think it was about £2 million. A tender went out for somebody to develop it further, make it digital, because it was published in a book, and the thought of it makes me cringe now. How we published it in a book, to make it online and then to maintain it. So that was £2 million. So it was the NBS, the National Building Specification in the UK. So they won that gig. So they made it digital, put it online, and that's how that's the iteration aligned and so on. So they're still maintaining it. I've got to be honest, I don't know how long that is going to go on for, but they have a commercial interest in making it work because all of their products are based on UniClass 2015. So I think there's a bit of a thing. Anyway, the point I'm saying is that you're right, it is maintained, right? So what we've done there is we've actually gone round. I mean, with UniClass, there was a criticism that it was built on buildings. It's not suitable for infrastructure. So we've addressed that. So we provided, as London Underground and Crossrail, we provided all our classification systems. Sydney Rail, City Trains have done the same. A lot of the infrastructure companies from the different sectors have all provided their classification systems into UniClass. So for me, it's very much now suited for infrastructure. So a lot of those myths are being put to bed. So yeah, I am going to be a little bit biased and say that it's probably the best one. But the reason is because it's been adopted and crowdsourced, for want of a better word, from many different countries, not just the UK. And it's free. Is that you mean? Yeah, it's free as well. So we don't charge for that either. So yeah, if you're looking for a classification system, then I would say, yeah, this is probably a good one to consider.
It's also updated almost fortnightly, depending. There's always something coming through. That's
so the way Sarah Delaney, bless her, she's almost made a career out of looking after UniClass. If there's something in there that you haven't got, and this is what I love about it, you reach out to Sarah, she'll provide you with a code, and then it'll be released in the next release. So there's no delay to it. But that happens less and less frequently because it's constantly getting added to.
Sanborn, Pilap Teles. Greetings, colleagues. I was just thinking, man, personally, I would towards the adoption, right, which is very low. Obviously, some radical, I think I always say this, radical political will is going to assist. So my question is, are we considering, or is there a strategy in that sense where our government speaks directly to UK, and we have a exchange program like projects where you have certain industry practitioners doing projects that are adopting the full spectrum of BIM in Britain or wherever, and and there's learnings from that. So that, because predominantly the adoption and the definition is vendor driven, in my opinion, and not necessarily the wholesome understanding, as my brother alluded, the process and the workflow with the many available applications. Is there an aggressive, deliberate sort of strategy? Because I feel as if that can also assist, and the learnings of that can assist in terms of how then and what it means to Africa.
Thanks. You see, that's the reason why I initially pointed to my colleague there also. So what we do is, like I said, we have a strategy, 5-10-year strategy, and that is the government's, and we're representing government. So what we're doing is we're approaching this thing multi-pronged. In terms of my colleagues, they started with the gauging of the maturity, for example, from the professions. They've done that. They're in the process of doing the one for the owners, the owners, and that is for every owner. I think it's private as well, or is it only government now? Only government. Yeah, and then the next one is the contractors. So from that one, we approach it from that perspective. Then we are doing this, and that's the reason why this is lower hanging fruit, the annexure, right? So that is what we are doing now. But ultimately, how we're driving this, the strategy is through procurement. We've been sitting with a standard. We said we wanted to have this about 5 years ago. You shall do this, and what's the name? This information management. But then we realized, no, we're short-sighted. We don't have an enabling environment for clients, like you said. They will tell the service providers, look, you shall, without having the black component there, you shall deliver this, and you shall give us the information. But there's no idea. They don't understand. We don't understand this, and that is the reason why we held back. And through this strategy, we are now going through procurement, but we first have to create an enabling environment by touching that structure that I was talking about, the change management process, promotion, the standards, guidelines, the tertiary education, the training, in terms of the protocol, in terms of security, and then the monitoring evaluation, and then the whole cycle. So government, that is government's strategy. That is what you were asking for. That is our strategy. But as much as we are impatient as well, we still have to do a lot of things. And we are talking, and this is one of that. We have other engagements with universities that have sort of links with UK universities and other in the United States and others. So we are working through that. In fact, the BIM strategy has been developed in cooperation with our partners. So there is a concerted effort from government to do that through the CIDP and Public Works, because we're reporting to them. And that is where we are moving towards. And that is why the very next one is the establishment of the focus group. And through that, we will see how this, and the impetus is very important, that we need to accelerate this process. We are also talking with, for example, the software providers, engaging them, how we can use and learn their sort of approaches and their systems and things like that. So we, with the engagement with the CIDP and the BIM community, you will be made much more aware of what the initiatives we are undertaking. Thank you.